Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating paradox. Why is it that after we work so hard to achieve something, we so often end up sabotaging our own success? Well, the answer has everything to do with a feeling we all know, but one we almost completely misunderstand.
You've been here before, right? You finally get that big promotion, you hit your goal weight, or a relationship is just going perfectly. And then, somehow, it all starts to unravel. You start to sabotage it. Your dreams start slipping away. It's an incredibly common and frustrating experience. And it makes you wonder, why is it so hard to just keep the success we've worked for?
For a long time, figuring this out felt impossible. And that's because we were looking in all the wrong places. Think about smallpox. For centuries, we tried to find a cure by studying people who were sick. But the breakthrough? It only came when we completely flipped our perspective and started studying the people who were healthy. In this case, the milkmaids. They were the ones who held the secret. And that is the exact same approach we're going to take here. So instead of dissecting failure after failure, we're going to learn from what actually creates success. And what we find is a real paradox, and it's all centered on the one obstacle we're all taught to avoid at all costs. And that obstacle has a name we all know: stress. We see it as this modern-day disease, right? The main culprit in our health problems, tension in our relationships, lost productivity. I mean, we've built a whole industry around trying to manage it, reduce it, and get rid of it. But what if we've got it all wrong? What about this number? 43%. So a major study found that having high levels of stress increased your risk of dying by 43%. That's a terrifying statistic. But here's the twist, the crucial detail. That was only true for people who also believed that stress was harmful to them. The danger wasn't the stress itself. It was what they believed about the stress. That one finding points to a pretty radical idea: the myth of stress. What if this disease we're all fighting isn't a disease at all? I mean, it's a strange disease when you think about it. The word itself was actually an engineering term for 500 years. It was used to talk about metals under pressure. We only started applying it to humans back in the 1930s. And since then, we've cured polio, we've made huge strides against cancer, but stress just remains stubbornly incurable. Why is that? Well, the answer becomes crystal clear when you just look at the symptoms. On one side, you have what we call a stress disorder. Your heart is racing, your mouth gets dry, you get that knot in your stomach. Sounds pretty familiar. Now, on the other side, you have the body's natural, life-saving fight or flight response. Do you notice the overlap? They're exactly the same thing. And this, right here, is the key insight. What we've been calling stress isn't a disease. It's just the wrong word. It's not a malfunction in your body. It's a feature. It's your body's healthy, natural alarm system. And that alarm is designed to signal one single thing: fear. Now, that doesn't mean the discomfort isn't real. Oh, it is. But the problem isn't the fear response itself. The real problem is what we do when we feel it. And unfortunately, many of our common coping mechanisms are actually just making things worse. In fact, here are 7 of the most common but really ineffective ways we try to quiet that alarm. You can remember them with the mnemonic dangers. That's depression, anger, negotiation, griping, eating, rumination, and substances. Each one is basically a form of avoidance. It's an attempt to mask the feeling of fear instead of listening to what it's trying to tell you. Let's just take eating as an example. Why does stress eating feel like it works in the moment? It's because our ancient brain knows it's impossible to eat and be afraid at the exact same time. So when you start eating, your amygdala, the brain's alarm center, literally assumes the lion is gone and just shuts off the alarm. The problem, of course, is the second you swallow, the fear comes rushing back, and you need another bite to quiet it down again. It's a temporary fix, not a real solution. So while most of us are busy with one of those dangers, trying desperately to get rid of fear, the most successful people out there are doing the exact opposite. They're actually embracing it. Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, he argues that if his teams aren't a little scared, then they're not doing their jobs. He sees fear not as something to run away from, but as a compass that's pointing directly toward innovation. So if avoiding fear is the wrong path, what's the right one? Well, it turns out there is a single, healthy, biologically wired response to fear that separates fleeting achievement from truly sustained success. This is that fork in the road. The answer actually comes from our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. When a chimpanzee gets frightened, its very first instinct isn't to fight or to run away. It's to reach. It makes physical contact with another chimp, and that simple connection is what quiets the alarm in its brain. And we are wired in the exact same way. This leads us to what decades of research from Harvard all the way to Kauai have confirmed is a fundamental law of success. It's a two-step process. First, you have to accept fear, not as a threat, but as a signal. And second, when that signal fires, your instinct must be to reach out for support. And this isn't just some nice theory. The highest achievers in the world have learned to reframe this instinct. They understand that reaching out isn't a confession of weakness. It is the single greatest strategy for building strength and resilience. Okay, but knowing you should reach out and knowing how to do it are two very different things. It can be surprisingly hard, especially when you're already feeling overwhelmed. Imagine you're a refugee from a culture that's rice-based, and you're suddenly standing in an American grocery store, just staring at a 50-foot aisle of bread. You know you need food, but you have no frame of reference for what to choose. That is exactly what asking for support can feel like. You know you need help, but you don't even know what kind of help to ask for. And this is why you need a menu. So the Inspire Guide helps you identify the specific kind of support you actually need. Do you need instruction, a how-to guide? Or maybe just nurturing, someone to listen without judging you? Or maybe you need inquisitiveness, someone to ask you really good questions that help you think differently? Or even supportive rejection, someone who can tell you no and challenge your assumptions. Knowing what to ask for is half the battle. So how do we put this into practice? Let's use physical health as an example. The process is pretty simple, but it's not always easy. First, you have to become aware of your own willingness or your fear of reaching out. Second, you consciously identify people who can support your goals. And third, you have to take the risk and actually reach out. Ultimately, it all comes down to this one mental shift. That feeling we call stress, it isn't an enemy that needs to be defeated. It's just your body's way of telling you that something important is happening and that it's time to connect with your tribe. It's a biological call to action. So the final question is this. The true test of your character in your work, your health, and your relationships isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when you are afraid. So the next time you feel that familiar alarm, that racing heart, that tightness in your stomach, what will you choose to do?